You know that feeling when someone mentions a game and you just sit there thinking, how did I completely miss that? These are the RPGs that went under the radar despite being great gaming experiences. Some are subtle, weird, or even slightly broken gems that somehow slipped through the cracks and now feel way more special because of it. Echoes of the End feels like the kind of RPG you accidentally find at 2 a.m. and then can't stop thinking about for days after you close it. It drops you into a dying high fantasy world that looks beautiful on the surface, but feels emotionally exhausted underneath. Like everyone already knows the end is coming, and they're just choosing different ways to cope with it. You play as a lone wanderer whose powers don't make you feel heroic so much as dangerous. Your abilities are destructive, unstable, and often scary to use, and NPCs react to you like they're not sure whether to trust you or fear you. It creates this subtle emotional tension where even doing the right thing can feel unsettling. Combat has weight. Enemies hit hard, movement matters, and you're constantly repositioning, managing cooldowns, and making choices that feel like they could spiral out of control if you get sloppy. It's satisfying when it clicks, but you'll die learning it. The world is quietly packed with story. Broken monuments, abandoned camps, scattered journals, and half-finished rituals hint at wars that already failed and heroes that didn't make it. You're not saving a thriving kingdom. You're walking through the remains of one. It's not perfect. Animations can feel stiff, facial expressions are limited, and some side quests fade out without clean resolution. But the tone, the pacing, and the melancholy atmosphere glue everything together into something strangely intimate. It doesn't feel like a power fantasy. It's more like wandering through a legend that already lost. Banner of the Maid is the kind of game that sneaks up on you. You boot it up expecting a stylish Fire Emblem-style tactics game set during a fantasy version of the French Revolution. And before you know it, you're emotionally invested in a war that refuses to make anyone feel clean or heroic. The battlefield design is excellent. Elevation levels and reload timing matters. Cavalry charges feel dangerous instead of flashy. Cannons reshape entire encounters instead of just doing bigger damage numbers. Every unit type has a purpose, and sloppy positioning will absolutely get someone killed. What surprised me most is how grounded the tone feels. Your party members aren't exaggerated heroes. They're tired soldiers, nervous recruits, and political idealists trying to convince themselves they're on the right side of history. The game lets you make choices that genuinely affect who stays loyal to you, and sometimes who survives. It's not without its rough edges. The translation stumbles occasionally. Some story beats move faster than they should. A few missions recycle similar objectives, but it consistently commits to consequence in a way most tactics RPGs shy away from. You'll finish battles feeling uneasy instead of triumphant. Victories can feel hollow and losses linger. Characters disappear and the game does not replace them. It simply moves on, leaving you to adjust. Banner of the Maid doesn't make you feel powerful. You feel responsible for your choices. And that single design decision is what makes it unforgettable. Svarig's Dream feels like someone took Slavic folklore, mixed it with old-school CRPG design, and then filtered the whole thing through a surreal fever dream. You play as a wandering soul, traveling through mythic dreamlands filled with strange spirits, cursed villages, living idols, and monsters pulled straight from Eastern European legends. It doesn't explain much. You're expected to piece together the rules of the world by observing behavior, listening to fragmented stories, and surviving encounters that don't care if you understand what's happening yet. Combat is slower and more deliberate than modern RPGs. Every hit matters. Every potion feels valuable. You can't just spam attacks and expect to win. You have to learn enemy patterns, exploit weaknesses, and sometimes just avoid fights entirely. Where the game really shines is atmosphere. The soundtrack hums with low chants and distant echoes. NPCs speak in riddles. Forest paths feel like they're watching you. There's a constant sense that you're trespassing in places you're not meant to be, and that discomfort is intentional. The visuals are minimalist but haunting. It's not pretty in a modern sense, but it's striking in a way that sticks in your memory. You'll remember specific creatures, villages, and dialogue lines long after you stop playing. It's not polished, sometimes not user-friendly, but it's one of the strangest, most quietly hypnotic RPG experiences you can stumble into. And it feels like discovering a forgotten folktale that was never meant to leave its homeland. The thaumaturge creeps up on you quietly, and then refuses to let go. Set in early 1900s Warsaw under Russian occupation, it blends historical fiction, psychological horror, and slow-burn detective storytelling into a deeply personal RPG. You are capable of seeing and binding saluter spirits, manifestations of human guilt, obsession, pride, grief, and regret. Every important character is carrying something broken inside them. And instead of simply fighting enemies, you investigate them. You read their fears, uncover their secrets, and then literally weaponize those emotional wounds in combat. The game doesn't reward brute force. It rewards understanding. Battles feel tense and deliberate. They're slower than modern RPGs, but much heavier emotionally. You're layering debuffs, exploiting mental weaknesses, managing spirit synergies, and slowly dismantling your opponent's stability rather than simply draining a health bar. Winning feels less like overpowering someone and more like outmaneuvering their psyche. The writing is where the game truly shines. Conversations feel personal and awkward in a realistic way. NPCs are shaped by class pressure, political fear, religious guilt, and quiet desperation. The occupied city doesn't feel like a backdrop. It feels tired, cautious, and emotionally closed off. You're rarely trusted, and when you are, it feels earned. It's not flashy. It doesn't chase spectacle, but it feels intimate, thoughtful, and strangely heavy. The kind of game that lingers in your head long after you put it down. Kingdoms of the Dump is one of those games you boot up out of curiosity and then suddenly realize you've been staring at trash piles and rusted sheet metal for 6 straight hours. It takes place in a collapsing post-apocalyptic city built entirely on refuse. Broken machines, shipping containers, old pipes, scrap towers stacked on top of each other like a vertical landfill civilization. And instead of playing a chosen hero, you're just another survivor trying to carve out a place in a society that literally lives on garbage. Combat is fast and scrappy. You're not swinging legendary swords. You're stabbing people with crowbars, jury-rigged blades, and improvised weapons that look like they were welded together 5 minutes ago. Fights feel dirty, chaotic, and sometimes unfair in a way that strangely fits the setting. You're encouraged to ambush, trap, and exploit the environment rather than rely on clean RPG power curves. But what really makes the game stick is how personal it feels. NPCs aren't quest dispensers. They're exhausted, paranoid, desperate people who remember how you treat them. Side quests can permanently change small neighborhoods. Some vendors stop talking to you if you betray the wrong group. Entire alley communities can collapse or stabilize depending on what you choose to do. It's rough around the edges. Some animations look stiff, performance can dip in busier areas, and tutorials barely explain anything. But once you understand its systems, the world starts to feel strangely alive. It's a game about surviving in the mess that's left, and it feels uncomfortably real. Those Who Rule looks like a traditional tactical RPG. Grid maps, turn-based battles, fantasy factions. But once you're in, you realize it's far more interested in psychology than spectacle. You're not leading fearless heroes. You're commanding people who are scared, tired, traumatized, and often unsure they should even be fighting. Reputation and morale matter. Relationships between units change how they perform. Characters can freeze up, hesitate, or even disobey if you've pushed them too hard for too long. Battles become tense in a different way. You're not just calculating damage, you're managing emotional pressure. You'll sometimes win a fight, but lose the loyalty of the squad that carried you through it. And that hurts in a way normal RPG systems don't usually attempt. The story unfolds slowly through camp conversations, side encounters, and the emotional fallout of your decisions. It feels personal, almost uncomfortable at times. You're forced to confront the cost of leadership, not just celebrate the victories. It's not flashy. Maps are small, animations are simple, and there aren't cinematic cutscenes pushing every story beat. But what it lacks in spectacle, it makes up for in emotional weight. It feels less like playing a game and more like being responsible for people who are breaking under the same war you're asking them to fight. Dex is the kind of game that feels like it slipped out of an alternate timeline, one where cyberpunk RPGs kept evolving in weird, personal directions instead of chasing blockbuster presentation. It doesn't try to overwhelm you with spectacle. It pulls you in slowly through neon-lit alleys, cracked CRT screens, and conversations that feel uncomfortably close to real life. You play as a young hacker navigating Harbor Prime, a corporate-controlled city where privacy is gone and freedom is rationed. The world is layered, not huge but dense. Apartments stack on top of underground clubs. Security drones float above slums that never appear on the city's official maps. The atmosphere alone carries half the game. The game blends side-scrolling exploration with dialogue-heavy RPG systems, and that mix feels awkward at first. Combat is simple, sometimes clunky, and enemy encounters repeat more than they should. But the role-playing choices are where the game mostly shines. Conversations don't feel like generic flavor text. They shape who trusts you, which factions open up, and which story threads quietly die without ceremony. What makes this stick is its emotional restraint. It doesn't scream its politics. It lets you sit in uncomfortable conversations about surveillance, inequality, and personal compromise, then forces you to live with your choices. Some characters drift away. Others only tolerate you. And sometimes doing the right thing makes your life harder, not easier. It's rough. The animations are stiff. Some systems feel half-finished. But Dex feels personal in a way most cyberpunk games don't, like a story told by someone who actually worries about the world they're writing. You're not saving the city. You're busy surviving it with your conscience intact. Lost Dimension looks like your typical anime RPG, and little did I know how cruel it actually is. You're dropped into a sealed city where a mysterious figure called the End has taken over a massive tower and begun wiping out the population floor by floor. You lead a small squad of operatives climbing upward, trying to reach him before humanity runs out of time. At first, it feels like a typical tactical RPG setup. Grids, special abilities, flashy character portraits, dramatic music. But then the game introduces its real mechanic. Someone in your team is a traitor, and that's randomized every playthrough. As you climb the tower, your squad members will start behaving slightly off. Some hesitate in dialogue, some miss attacks, and others react strangely to orders. You're forced to analyze them, run psychological evaluations, and eventually accuse someone of betrayal. And if you're wrong, you execute an innocent teammate and permanently weaken your entire run. This system completely rewires how you play. You stop thinking about stats first. You start watching people. You hesitate before trusting characters you actually like. Every decision feels personal, uncomfortable, and tense. Even when you guess correctly, it doesn't feel good. It just feels necessary. Combat itself is fast, stylish, and surprisingly deep, with satisfying combo chains and character synergies. But it's the emotional weight of your choices that sticks. The game makes you complicit in its cruelty. Lost Dimension isn't perfect. Environments repeat. Some characters are thinly written, and its presentation is clearly limited by budget. But nothing else plays quite like it. It forces you to confront what leadership really means when survival demands sacrifice. It's a tactical RPG that makes you feel responsible in ways few games ever try.
Here I go!
Mars, Warlogs feels like the kind of RPG you'd expect to be shallow, and then it surprises you with depth and having actual teeth. You wake up on a hostile, dying Mars where water is currency, factions run everything, and nobody is pretending to be good. The world feels harsh, dry, and quietly desperate. There's no heroics here. It's all dust, broken technology, and political backstabbing, and that tone alone already makes it stand out. Combat is clunky. You will notice it. Animations can feel stiff, and the early fights aren't exactly thrilling. But the longer you play, the more you realize the game is less about flashy action and more about navigating power. Positioning matters, and bad preparation will punish you fast. Once the systems click, the rhythm feels surprisingly satisfying. You're constantly choosing who to trust, which groups to side with, and how much of your own morality you're willing to trade for influence. The world is compact, but tightly written. Factions have believable motivations. Companions react to your decisions. And your reputation actually changes how people treat you. Sometimes quietly, sometimes violently. You don't just gain skills. You gain leverage, and that leverage changes entire quest lines. The visuals are dated. Some dialogue animations are painfully stiff. But the writing has a raw sincerity that carries the experience. You're constantly making compromises. You rarely feel clean, and you never really feel safe. This isn't smooth, but it feels real, and in sci-fi RPGs, that's rarer than it should be. Of Orcs and Men looks like a gritty fantasy brawler at first glance, but after actually playing, it's a surprisingly heartfelt story about identity, loyalty, and what it means to be labeled a monster. You control two protagonists at once. One is a massive orc warrior built for raw destruction, and the other a cynical goblin assassin who lives in the shadows. Their personalities couldn't be more different, and that contrast drives both the story and gameplay in clever ways. Combat revolves around switching between them. The orc smashes through enemies head-on, while the goblin relies on stealth, traps, poisons, and distractions. You're constantly juggling brute force and careful planning, often using one to thin enemy groups before unleashing the other in brutal, messy encounters. But it's not smooth, animations can be stiff, and enemy AI can be unpredictable. But when the systems click, fights feel personal and tactical instead of spammy. The real strength is the writing. This is a fantasy world where orcs and goblins are hunted nearly to extinction, and the game doesn't romanticize that struggle. Towns can fear you, soldiers will insult you, and allies might hesitate to trust you. But slowly, through banter, quiet moments, and hard choices, you watch something build that feels like genuine friendship. It's flawed, uneven, and very Eurojank, but it has heart, and a story that treats monsters as people long before that became overdone.
Thank you, Mother Earth.
Wintermore Tactics Club might be something you'd scroll past without a second thought. If you don't like cartoon colors, polite piano music, tiny characters walking quietly through snowy school hallways, it feels almost aggressively gentle. I expected a cozy distraction. What I got was one of the most emotionally honest RPGs I've played in years. You play as a socially anxious student at an elite private school, where students settle personal conflicts through tabletop, role-playing games. It sounds silly at first, but that framing becomes the game's greatest strength. Every tactical battle represents a real emotional dispute between kids who don't know how to talk about what they're feeling. Popularity, jealousy, fear of being left behind. All of it gets turned into grid-based combat. The battles themselves are surprisingly thoughtful. Classes are shaped by personality rather than power fantasy. Some characters lose effectiveness when separated. Others need emotional support to perform well. Positioning isn't just tactical, it feels psychological. You start paying attention to who gets overwhelmed easily, who panics under pressure, and who quietly holds the team together. It isn't flawless. Some maps drag on longer than they should. Enemy variety could be wider. A few dialogue sections lean a little heavy on internal monologue. but the writing consistently lands where it matters. You remember the characters and what hurts them, and you start choosing party members based on who you think can emotionally handle the situation, not just who has better stats. By the time the credits roll, you're not thinking about loot or builds. You're thinking about the characters. That quiet emotional weight is what makes Wintermoor linger in your head long after you stop playing. Felvedek feels less like a game and more like something you weren't supposed to find. The first time I launched it, it honestly felt like I had uncovered some half-forgotten Eastern European folklore artifact that somehow slipped into modern storefronts. The pixel art is low resolution but intensely deliberate. Warped faces, crooked churches, fog-soaked forests, and villages that look like they're rotting from the inside out. It twists nostalgia into the point of weaponizing it. You play as a wandering knight moving through plague-stricken lands. Try to make sense of a spreading spiritual corruption that nobody fully understands. The writing is strangely flat, yet deeply unsettling. NPCs talk about saints, demons, rumors, and punishment in the same tired, matter-of-fact voice, like they've already accepted that whatever's coming can't be stopped. Sometimes the dialogue is funny in a dark, uncomfortable way. Sometimes it feels like it's staring straight through you. Combat is simple but nerve-wracking. You don't feel like a hero. You feel fragile. Healing is scarce. Enemies hit harder than expected, and random encounters never feel disposable. Every fight drains you emotionally as much as mechanically, and losing doesn't feel like a setback. It feels like proof you misunderstood the world you're in. The map is intentionally confusing. The UI is crude. You're rarely sure if you're progressing correctly or just drifting deeper into something you don't understand. But that's so good about it. Felvedek wants you to feel anxious, be cautious, and suspicious of every decision you make, almost emulating what you would actually feel like living in that world.